probably think of a prompt engineer as like a glorified technical writer. One of the things that I want to convince you of today is that actually there's more engineering in prompt engineering than you might think at first glance. A prompt engineer is not just an LLM whisperer. They're not optimizing based on vibes. They're a scientist running experiments and collecting the results of those experiments, scoring prompts and models on objective criteria, and the tool for doing that is what we call evals, or evaluations. An evaluation, the goal of an evaluation is to select the combination of prompt and model that is going to give you the best result for your use case and handle as many of the edge cases as possible. And so like as you sort of iterate on your prompts, you are probably going to discover a lot of failure modes, a lot of edge cases. And so this process of like scientifically evaluating prompts and models is going to help you avoid those so that your end users don't encounter those edge cases. And then even more, once you roll out your product to a live user base, you will discover even more failure modes and edge cases, and hopefully you are building a test suite. As you encounter those, you can just add to your test suite to make sure that you are optimizing for those cases as well. And honestly, if you are a software developer building an AI-powered product, I think this is going to make or break you. This is really the difference between success and failure, I think, for an AI-powered application developer. And in fact, I think whether you're a software developer or not, I think every business in the country actually should have its own eval suite and should be building that right now. Regardless of what your AI workflow is, if you're using AI at work, you should be building evals. So I'm going to walk you through the open source tool that I'm going to show you how to use is called PromptFoo. And I'm going to walk you through initially the installation, just step by step. And we're going to try to build just a basic minimal eval in about 15 minutes. And it won't be a great eval, but it'll get you started. This URL will take you to the quick start docs for PromptFoo. And if you want to use that QR code, you can snap a quick photo of that, and that'll get you to the documentation for it. If you have never heard of Docker, I highly recommend that if you're running open source code from the internet, you use Docker. And Docker is just going to essentially create like a self-contained container on your computer. It will have its own operating system, and it will be isolated from everything else on your computer so that the code that's running inside the container can't affect stuff that's outside of it. So it's creating essentially a secure environment that is not going to be able to do malicious stuff to your computer. And I think that's a really important safety measure if you're running code from the internet that you have not personally reviewed. So I highly recommend this. The other nice thing about this is that it makes that environment that you're running the code in perfectly reproducible. So if I can get this to work in Docker on my computer, you should be able to get it to work in Docker on your computer, because our environments should be the same. They should be reproducible across multiple computers. That's one of the advantages of these containers. And then, of course, VS Code is a nice tool that has a lot of integration for working with Docker, for working inside containers. And it makes it very easy to then get inside a container and do stuff inside the container. So I would recommend that as a nice tool for working with containers. All right, so here's the optional part. If you follow my advice and you want to do this in Docker and VS Code, these are the steps to set that up. In VS Code, you would click at the top menu, you would click View and then Command Palette, and that's going to give you a search bar. In the search bar, you would say, let's reopen this project in a container, and you select that. You would select a Node.js image that's just going to it's going to basically create a Linux environment with Node.js, which is the JavaScript engine, installed. And it's going to set all of that up for you so that you have a self-contained operating system that cannot affect anything else on your computer. So once you've selected that, it's going to build the container, and then it will probably open a terminal for you automatically, but if it hasn't, you can always select a new terminal from the terminal menu at the top. And now you have your self-contained, just in 5 steps, you have a self-contained operating system that's secure and that can't do anything malicious to your computer. So I just think this is a nice, like, it's optional, but you should do this, in my opinion. All right, so now we're in the container and we're ready to install PromptFoo. And it works just like any other JavaScript dependency. It's actually very easy to do, just npm install PromptFoo. And that @latest tag just says, let's update it to the latest version. Once you've got it installed, it'll take a couple minutes to install, but once you've got it installed, then you can initialize a PromptFoo project. And that simply requires running npx promptfoo init. And then there's a couple different, like, it'll create a config file for your eval. And if you knew all the syntax, you could create your eval inside that just config file by writing YAML. But I'm going to show you how to do it in the web interface. And so to start the web interface, you simply type npx promptfoo view, and then you navigate to localhost 15500 and the setup page in your browser. In order to run any AI evals, of course, you will need API keys for your AI providers. And so just very quickly, I will show you how to get an OpenAI API key. You come to the OpenAI dashboard, you click dashboard up at the top, and you click API keys over on the sidebar. You create a new API key, you give it a name, and then you say create secret key, and it gives you a key right there, and you can simply copy it. Now, don't worry about me. I have deleted that key already, so if you steal that key, it will avail you nothing. But yeah, you don't want to then go commit your keys to version control or anything. Don't share your key with anyone, obviously, because that will let them spend money on your account. So don't do that. And then, so actually, we want to advance to the next slide. OK, so this is the PromptFoo web interface. This is if you navigate to that localhost 15,500. This is what you will see. This is the interface for building your eval. You, up at the top, will see that API keys right there. And if you click that, you will see a place to set your API keys. And you can set API keys for lots of different providers, but for the purposes of this demo, I just set the OpenAI one. There we go. All right, so now you are ready to create your eval. That was all the setup. You're now set up and ready to go. For our demo, let's imagine that we are building an application that will let the user choose 2 recipes. We're going to choose a main course and a side dish for a meal. And what we want the LLM to do is generate a grocery shopping list that's going to combine the ingredients for both recipes and give us the quantities that we should be buying at the grocery store. And we want it in this JSON format. We want a structured data output in this JSON format with these 3 keys. We're going to have the product name, we're going to have quantity, and we're going to have the unit that quantity is measured in. So we would simply, first we need to select a couple of models to evaluate. And so right here in the PromptFoo interface where it says providers, you can select whatever models you want to evaluate. And if you clicked on either of these providers, you also could change the temperature or change max output tokens or other configuration for each model. So if I wanted to evaluate, let's say, what does it look like if I do GPT-4o with a temperature of 1 versus a temperature of 0? I could test those against each other as well. So you can test the same model but with multiple configurations, or we can test multiple models against each other. Yeah. Can you select any open source models from that drop-down menu? Yes. So there are a set of standard models that they provide, and I believe that the Llama models are included in those, but you have to go through like a third-party provider. because Meta is not serving an API for Llama. But there are like Vertex and a couple of other API providers that serve multiple models, and you can select those if you have an API key for that provider. And also, it supports both manual input. So if you had like a model that for whatever reason didn't have an API, you could do manual input and just paste it in. And it also supports local models. So if you have a local model that you have hosted in a Docker container, you could simply point prompt foo to that Docker container, and then you could run your evals against local models. So,
what about Hugging Face? Do you get one on Hugging Face?
So typically with Hugging Face, well, I guess there are APIs that are served from Hugging Face, and I haven't tried that here. But they have a lot of integrations and plugins. I suspect that there's a Hugging Face plugin. I haven't looked for that, so I don't take me at my word. But also, you can download a lot of those Hugging Face models, and you can serve them locally from a Docker container, and then you absolutely could run evals against them. But yeah, I'm assuming you can. Okay, so we've set up comparing the models. Let's go to the next slide, if it'll let me. Okay, prompt foo, we also want to test prompts against each other. So we'll set up a couple of different prompts as well. Prompt foo has a templating syntax, and it's really very simple. You write out the parts of the template that are always going to be the same, and then you have variable inputs where you can, like, let's say the recipes would be variables. So the part of my prompt that's always going to be the same would be like, let's consolidate these ingredients and output a grocery shopping list. The part that's going to be different is the actual recipes. And so we would use variables for the recipes. And the syntax is simply that you give the variable a name, and the variable name goes inside double curly braces in the template to indicate where that variable should be inserted. And so let's see how to add a prompt. We'd simply click the Add Prompt button. We lay out the problem in our desired output format there. We're going to show the example of the output that we want. And we're going to give it some guidance on solving the problem. And we're going to say, if two recipes use the same ingredient, then we don't want duplicates. We want to consolidate those. And if they're in different units, if they're measured in different units, like one uses cups and one uses tablespoons, then we need to perform some kind of conversion there in order to consolidate those. And finally, you want to include the variables down there at the bottom. So we've got our main recipe and our side recipe as variables enclosed in the double curly braces down there at the bottom. And you simply click Add in order to add the prompt. So then let's create another prompt. You can imagine ways that we might optimize that. So we might, for instance, provide a conversion table for the units so that it has common units you might encounter in recipes and how to convert those to other units. Or we might give it specific instructions. Like sometimes if you tell a model, like, don't do this, like don't put the JSON in triple backticks in markdown format, it'll actually do that thing because you've sort of like subliminally suggested that it should do that thing, even though you said don't. It's like, oh, the prompt contains the words markdown, so I'm going to format it in markdown. So you might want to like test different ways of sort of providing that instruction. Like, okay, what if I say just output the JSON? Is that going to give me better results than if I say don't output markdown, right? So you could test different language like that. But so you click this duplicate button over here, and then you can simply edit the existing prompt to make a modification to it in the sort of second version. And so here I put that conversion chart for the units, and we'll see how that performs against the initial prompt that we had. So a test case consists of variable inputs and then assertions for grading the output. So we've got our models that we want to evaluate and our prompts that we want to evaluate. Now we need to create a test. So we've got to create inputs and we've got to create assertions that we'll use for grading. So in order to get inputs, I simply went to Claude and I said, hey Claude, generate 2 recipes for me, and we want the recipes to have some shared ingredients, and we want to use different units for those ingredients in each recipe. So we're just going to like stress test the model here. And it did a pretty good job. It output, plausible recipes here to test against each other. So here's how I would do that. I would simply click Add a Test Case, and it provides variables fields. So I just copy the sample case that Claude gave me, and I paste it into the main course variable, and then I'll do the same with the side dish. We simply paste it into that field. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to validate that we got valid JSON. So we're going to have it check, 1, is it JSON, and 2, does it conform to the JSON schema that we wanted. So I went to Claude and I gave it my sample input that we created with the product, the quantity, and the unit. And I said, give me a JSON schema for this. And there's a standard spec for JSON schema, and Claude does a really nice job of generating these JSON schemas. We can see, yes, we want an array. It's got properties, and it has correctly listed the 3 properties we want: product, quantity, and unit. It has indicated that those 3 properties are all required. We don't want to allow any additional properties. And it also has correctly specified the data types for those 3 properties. So this is the JSON schema that we want our output to conform to. And then back in the PromptFoo interface, we add an assertion. We're going to select the isJSON assertion type. And by the way, there are a lot of different assertion types here, and they're all documented in the documentation. And we simply paste Claude's schema into the value field for the schema, and then you can click Update Test Case. And now we have an assertion for validating that the JSON is in the expected format. Here are some of the assertion types that are available in PromptFoo. There's lots of different assertion types. If you have an ideal output that you really want the output to look like your ideal output, you can do a direct similarity check. It'll run like an embedding comparison to see like how close the output is to your ideal output. But there's lots of other ways to do it, both with LLM grading that's for more subjective things, or mechanical tests for deterministic things that we want our output to do. So I can validate, for instance, is it valid JSON, is it valid XML, is it valid SQL code, whatever kind of output we're looking for, we can just validate that. I can do regex in order to do string matching. See, does it follow whatever format I want? I can look, does it contain a word that I'm looking for? Does it not contain a word that I'm looking to exclude from the output? I can write custom JavaScript or Python tests, or I can create an LLM rubric and send it to GPT-4 to have GPT-4 evaluate, does it actually meet the criteria that I want? So let's add one more test. Since we want the model to consolidate ingredients from the 2 recipes, we don't want duplicate product keys in our JSON. So we'll just check that there are no duplicate products. And now the naive way to do this is with what's called an LLM rubric. That's where we could just ask GPT-4 to validate that there are no duplicate keys, and it would give us a true-false. True if there are no duplicate keys, false if there are not. So here's how we would do it. We would select the LLM rubric type. Let me show that again. Select the LLM rubric assertion type, and then in the value key, we create an assertion. So does not contain any duplicate products. And it will return true if the LLM's output does not contain duplicate products, and false if it does contain duplicate products. So then if we wanted to do it in a more mechanical way, this is probably the better way to do it, because every time you call GPT-4 to grade an output, you're paying for API usage with GPT-4, and occasionally you might get it wrong. So the LLM grading is not perfect. So the better way to do it probably would be with Python. And so Akanshu, my colleague Akanshu here in the front row, wrote me this Python test to just validate that there are no duplicate keys. We want to return true if there are no duplicate keys, and we want to either raise an error or return false if we have duplicate keys. So that will pass if there are no duplicates, and fail if there are duplicates. And unfortunately, PromptFoo does not in the GUI support custom Python tests. So if you want to use a custom Python or JavaScript test, you have to actually come down here and edit the YAML file. Here's very quickly how to do that. You would just come down to the test section, the assertions, and then you would add a test of type Python, and you point it to the file, the test file, the location of your Python test. All right, so we've got our assertions, we've got our inputs, and we've got the models and the prompts that we want to evaluate. So let's go ahead and run the eval now. So we built the eval, we want to run it. Here's how we do it. We scroll to the top, we click Run Evaluation. It's going to generate this eval. And you can see up here at the top, it's got a statistical summary, which is really nice. And then it's basically going to run the test against a matrix of both the models that we chose and the prompts that we defined. So each prompt and model combination is going to be one test case, basically. So we have 4 columns. Each of those is for a combination of model prompt. And we can see that on the left-hand side, GPT-4o, both the tests involving GPT-4o failed, and both the tests involving GPT-4o mini actually passed, which is interesting because GPT-4o is the more expensive model, GPT-4o mini is the cheaper model, and yet GPT-4o mini does better on our JSON tasks. So sometimes you get counterintuitive results like this. You find out that actually going with the most expensive model may not always be the best solution for your use case. Sometimes the smaller models are better, especially for sub-specialized tasks like outputting JSON. There are a couple different layers here. So each set of inputs is one test, but then within a test, you might have multiple assertions. And so we can see the outputs both at the level of the test, which is the inputs, and at the level of the assertions, which is the outputs. And so down here in the second row, we see the assertion level output, and GPT-4o failed both of our tests, and GPT-4o mini passed both of our tests. And if we want detail on what happened with each assertion, we actually can click the little magnifying glass in order to drill down more on the outputs. We can scroll in between the assertions, and then we can click the magnifying glass. And when we do that, we will be able to see the prompt, we can see the LLM output, and then we can scroll down and see the results for each assertion. PromptFoo is a pretty versatile tool. It is mostly tailored to text outputs, but you can do some other things with it. You can evaluate image outputs. I don't think they have any capability to evaluate voice chat or audio outputs, so that's definitely a limitation of this tool. You'd need a different tool for audio outputs. You can evaluate local models, as I mentioned to Saber. You can evaluate agents and RAG pipelines, so it has plugins for handling agents, for handling RAG pipelines. And like I said, you can evaluate different temperature settings. And it also has a feature that if you've got tests defined, like we defined, it can then extend, it can auto-extend your test suite. So it will use an LLM to develop more tests that test the same thing as your existing test suite, but maybe slightly different versions, so that you can get like a larger sample size, basically, in your test output. So you don't have to manually write a bunch of different tests. So that is 15-minute evals, and I invite questions. That's all I've got. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've seen a little bit of this before, but one thing I guess I was expecting to see earlier in your presentation was, let's say I'm a big organization, I'm building a tool, right? Where is this prompt tool going to be beneficial? Is this going to be beneficial when I'm into the exploration phase, or is this going to be more important when I'm about to deploy the tool and make it accessible to a wider range of users?
Yeah, so I think this is maybe the second step. The first step would just be to like naively write some prompts and like run it and see what the failure modes are, right? Like just develop a couple of like trials yourself and see what the failure modes are. And then once you identify a few failure modes, then it might be useful to do something like this, where let's see if all of the models are vulnerable to those failure modes, or if there are certain models that do better. And let's see how like different wording, I mean like some of the experimenting with different wording in the prompts you can obviously do manually, but you want some repeatability here. And that's really what we're going for, is repeatability. So as I like roll out new versions, and as the LLM providers roll out new versions of their models, by the way, also, you want to be able to respond to that. So like if I'm using GPT-4o Mini, sometimes OpenAI will roll out a new version of GPT-4o Mini, and it's still called GPT-4o Mini, but it's a different model than the one that I've been using. And so maybe all of a sudden, that just starts failing for me. I probably want to make this eval process part of my CI pipeline, so that every time I'm pushing a new version, we make sure that the models are still behaving as expected on our suite of test cases, right? And if all of a sudden my evals are failing, maybe I want to switch to a different model, maybe I want to like retool my prompt, but I want to be able to respond, I want to be able to identify that very quickly and be able to respond to it very quickly as a developer, because that is one thing you can't tolerate as a developer, is for some third-party dependency to all of a sudden start like crashing your application or causing it to fail. So I think that's the goal really, is like, you need to do this before you deploy to production. This should be part of like routine versioning and updating. But you probably don't need this until you're ready to go to production, right? So I think like you can do sort of manual exploration during the development phase, but like once you push to production, I think you need this. Yeah.
Do you think this would be good for like developing an LLM also?
Oh yeah. In fact, this has like massive, actually I think it's like probably primarily AI safety people who put it together, because it has huge like ecosystem of plugins for red teaming and safety evaluation. And so if anybody who's developing models or doing safety testing, stress testing for LLMs should like check this out, because it really has very impressive safety capabilities. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. We kept it short, and you can all go get dinner now. Thank you.
No, you mean enter the raffle.
Yes, enter the raffle, yeah.